Okay, let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome to this week's webinar, KeyShot 6 Master Series Part 3. Today we'll be covering the advanced material control in KeyShot 6, and more specifically we'll be looking at the new capabilities through the material graph and the material animations for KeyShot Pro users. My name is Dries Vervoort. I am a digital media artist at Occlusion. So let's get into KeyShot. So I have this model here that I worked on in last week's webinar as well. I've reverted it to just a single diffuse material. I'm running KeyShot Pro now, and as I double-click the material, in the material properties, we have the option for the material graph. Let me quickly resize my window. As I click the material graph, I get the material graph window. In here, we get a nodal overview of the material we have selected. We see we have a diffuse material node, and here we can start adding features to our base material. What I want to do in this example is create a painted object with sort of weathered and worn edges, so that the base surface, which I'm going to make a metal, will show up. What this will look like is something similar to this, where you have a paint surface, and because of damage and dents and scratches, the metal underneath gets exposed. And we'll also try to put on some sort of grease and dirt on top of the material. So the way I will start out is by changing the diffuse material into a metal. I do this by double-clicking the diffuse node in the material graph, and then switching the material type in the material properties to a metal. You see that the real-time view updates, as well as my node, which now states it is a metal. I will change the roughness here, as well as the color, so that it looks like a rough steel. So this is going to be the base material of my setup. Now, a handy thing to do is to think of the material graph workflow as sort of an analogy to real-world materials. So if you have a metal and you have a paint on top of it, you actually make a separate material that you sort of put on top of this metal. So the way we add a new material is there are various ways to do this. So we have the menu on top, this menu bar, where you can go to nodes, materials, and we can add a paint in here. We also have the option here to add a material node to the work area. If you click this one, by default you get an advanced material. And we have, as a final alternative, a right-click context menu where you can add various types of nodes, materials, textures, animations, utilities. And here we can select any available material as well. In this case, we'll add a paint. And right now you don't see anything because it is not attached to anything. And the first material, this metal, with the asterisk, this is actually the base material. As you can see here in the material properties where it states it is a metal. If we then click on this white orb, the output, and drag it on top of the metal, then automatically it gets added as a label. You can see here, label 1. And the nice thing about this label system is that it is totally consistent with the existing old style of working with labels. So if we go to the label tab of the material, we can see now a new label has been added, and it is a paint material, and this is the node we are seeing here. So as I double click this paint node, I get the properties right beside, and I will change this into a orangey yellow paint, like this. I will also change the roughness into a smooth paint. Now what I want to do is expose the base metal on these edges. If you click on this connector line, you can right-click and disable, and this temporarily disables the effect of the connected node. You can also remove a link. So how I'm going to expose these edges is through a opacity mask that I will apply as a occlusion texture. So again, I don't see any change in the real-time view because my occlusion is detached. It has no connection to the material. A nice trick to see the color content, so to speak, of a texture or a material is to select it, click it, and then hit the C button. And this gives, in the real-time view, sort of the shading of that single node. You'll notice that the node gets colored in red. You can disable the preview by hitting the X key or hitting the C key again. So I will hit the C key for the occlusion texture to sort of tweak and tune my occlusion shader. I will double click the occlusion texture, which gives me all the properties. And here I will tweak it so that the flat surfaces and the big surfaces are white and the edges are black. So that if I use it as an opacity map, that my metal will come through these edges. So I will use a trick for this because I'm using a solid CAD model. If I click on the inside option, if I enable this inside option and then decrease the scale, I'm using a small scale because my scene is in meters. If I do this, then I get edges that are highlighted in black. Now, let me increase the samples to get more definition. Now, I say black, but these edges are not really black. They are sort of a gray tone. So it's not quite as dark as I want to have them. So what I'll do, or what I want to do, is to increase the contrast on these edges. I could increase the contrast through the normal parameter, but if I do this, then yeah, my edges get thinner and I'm not really getting the effect that I'm looking for. So to increase the contrast, I'm going to right-click in the material graph background and add a utility node. And I'll select the color adjust node. The color adjust node is a node that takes another texture or that takes a texture or any other input and manipulates it. So let me attach. I'm still in the preview mode, by the way, for the occlusion node, so I'm going to hit X to exit it. And I'm going to attach the output of the occlusion to the color input of the color adjust node. Notice that I can do it in any of two ways. I can drag and drop it straight onto the color input, but I can also drag it onto the middle of the node, and that will give me a pop-up window where I can pick from a list the channel I want to map. And in this case, I will pick the color input. And if I click on the color adjust node and then hit C again, I get a preview of the color adjust. Let me first rearrange these nodes like this. By the way, you can scroll with the mouse wheel in and out, and that will zoom in the material graph. Now in the color adjust node, as I double click it, I get the properties, and here I can increase the contrast, and now you can see that I get much better definition in these edges, and I can increase these way further. I think I'm happy with this contrast. So now I can use this as an opacity on my paint material. Again, I'll hit X to exit the preview, and now I will connect the output of the color adjust node and drag it onto the paint and select opacity from the pop-up menu. And now you can see that I have a paint material, but on my edges, on all my sharp edges, the metal underneath is exposed, which is exactly what I want. So let's talk a bit about the organization of nodes in the material graph. Sometimes you find yourself with having nodes scattered all over the place, or having, being quite hard to sort of get an overview. We have a few nice commands here. We have the Align Nodes in Work Area button that if you click it, it will automatically arrange the nodes in a visually sort of pleasing way. And we have also commands to zoom your view to include and fit all the nodes you currently have. So let's expand this material from here. Perhaps we not only want to show the metal through the edges, but we might want to have some scratches in here as well. So what I want is to sort of expand this opacity map to have black scratches as well, so that my metal is exposed in the scratches too. I will start by right-clicking, going to Textures and then Scratches. I will hit the C button for a preview. Double-click to get the properties. I will change the scale. Maybe increase the density. So now I have an overview of where the scratches are positioned on my model with the texture. So now I want to add these scratches to this occlusion result. So the way to combine the effect of two textures is through another utility node, which is the color composite. So I will add the output of the color adjust to the source and the scratches to the background of the color composite. And I will attach the output to the opacity of the paint. You notice as I drop the output onto the opacity that my original link gets replaced, because it's a nice little trick. Now I'm not seeing the scratches yet, because if I double click the color composite, you can see that the blend mode is set to normal. These blend modes are very similar and in fact identical to the ones you have in Photoshop. So if you're familiar with compositing, these will feel very, very similar. So if I want to combine two black values into one texture, I would have to pick multiply. If I pick multiply, you can see now that I have both the occlusion and the scratches as an opacity map on my paint. Now want to have some bumping, some bump map on these scratches because they look kind of flat right now. And I want these bumps to appear on the paint material. What I can do is go to the scratch node and drag from this output onto the paint material and select bump. And now I'm using the scratch texture both for the opacity map as well as the bump for the paint. If I double click the scratch texture, I can set the height of the bump map in here. And now I'm getting a material that's starting to look a little more interesting. And now if I turn the light, you can see I'm getting some nice highlights on these bumps. Again, I can hit this organize button to get a more sort of streamlined alignment of my nodes. So I have now scratches as a bump on my paint, but again in a similar fashion as I want to have multiple textures for a single parameter. I not only want to have bumps on the scratches, but I also want to have a sort of a bump on the paint itself. So I will right click in the material graph window. I will go to textures and I will be defining a bump through a, let's pick a noise texture. If I want to combine two textures for bump of a single material, the way to do it is to add a utility node called bump add. With bump add, you can have a combination of two bump maps. So I'll drag from the output of the scratches procedural onto bump 1, and I'll drag from the other texture onto bump 2, and I'll drag the output to bump, and again my original connection is replaced with a new one. To sort of tweak the look of the noise as a bump map, I can select this node, the noise, and hit B. If I hit B, then I get a preview of the normal maps that will be used for the bump. And double click the noise, and now I can start adjusting the scale. I'll hit X to exit the preview. And if I now zoom in, I can see there is some bumping. I can also increase the bump height. Now I'm getting a nice bump across the paint. The bump add as additional controls for tweaking the sort of the balance, the weight between both bump maps. So we have a ratio which can be put from 0 to 1, and if I put this to 0, I get all scratches and no noise for the bump, and if I put this to 1, it goes the other way around. So by default, this value is 0.5, so you get equal sort of strength from both textures. But I can also more finely tune the weight of each individual texture. So for instance, if I want to lower the intensity of my noise bump, then I can play with this weight value. And that way my scratch bump is not affected. I can also increase the weight for the other one, and then my scratches will be more defined.
Hey, Dries. We have a
Yes?
question about the color composite node. Could you go into detail about each of the options available for the color composite?
Yeah, sure. Let me see. So, thinking if I should maybe open another example. Let me see. Yeah, so the color composite basically blends a source and a background. So it blends two textures, but you have different controls for how the blending is done. First of all, yeah, you specify the blend mode. So depending on the result or the application or the result you want to achieve, you will find a fitting blend mode here. And then the source as well as the background have a texturable alpha. And as I decrease this alpha, you can see that if I put this to 0 for the source, that my source texture, which is the occlusion that I use to highlight the edges, disappears. And if I put this to 1, then they come back. The same is true for the background alpha. Now it's a bit confusing because I have the bump mapping going on, so I will disable the bump mapping. So now if I increase the background alpha, you can see what's happening. So these alpha channels allow you to tweak the weight of each texture, both source and background separately. Then we have a general alpha as well, but I have to show another scene to sort of explain its functionality. So let me just add another color composite. So that's one thing to note, that you can stack all of these. So you can have a color composite as input to another color composite, and I'll add this one to this. I'll add this one to the source and attach this one to the opacity. Now, let me just do something different. I'll pick another scene that I prepared. So here I have a toon material set up. Also using the occlusion to catch the sharp edges and pulling them through a color adjust to increase my contrast. And then I have this color composite. And actually here I have just a single texture input on the source, and my background is just a flat color. So this is white. And the reason why I did this is that I can, by adjusting the background, change the color of my tool material. And here you'll notice as I play with this background alpha that I can sort of weight with a weight on my background color, and the same for the source alpha. Here I control sort of the weight of my internal edges, which are defined by the occlusion texture. Let me see. So in this example, I'll add another color composite to the source and the output of the second one to the color. And in this one, I will put the background to a red color, and if I now change the alpha in the first color composite, then you'll see as I'll decrease the alpha that if it turns completely transparent, so that if my alpha is 0, then I will get the color defined in the second color composite. So the alpha you have here is a global sort of opacity for your entire color composite node, while the source alpha only sort of specifies or defines the alpha for your source texture, and the background alpha only affects the background color. Then we have the mask mode, which is similar in functionality to the alpha. And what you can do with the mask is I can add a texture. Let me pick the spots. Hit C for a preview, and I'll scale this one down, not quite as far. So then I have spots, and if I now connect this one to the color composite as a clipping mask, you can see that wherever I have the black spots, I am sort of masking out the color composite, and it shows the color I have defined here in the second one. And with this mask applied, I have options, more specific options to use only the alpha, the color, or separate color channels. You can also invert the mask. So, but the functionality, the mask mode is similar to the global alpha, but you have more control over how you apply the opacity. So hope that covers everything there is to say about the color composite. Also, wherever you see these texture thumbnails, you can apply a texture either by clicking it, which opens the browser where you can select a bitmap, or you can right-click it and add a procedural texture this way. So, with this said, I'm going to close this scene and I'll open another one. Just to show a few more developed versions of this scene and to show where you can take things. So here is a scene I set up using the same approach, and I open the material graph, and you'll notice it's quite a bit more complicated. So what I have here is the metal here as a base. Then I have hit C to preview the results of this plastic. So this is the paint, and then I have some yellow material on top, which is the sort of the spots and the drips of paint on top of the base paint. And you can see by combining all sorts of textures and running them through the color composite can give you some very nice results. So if I zoom in on this yellow paint, you can see that I'm using spots to mask out the paint as well as scratches. So you get some interesting effects with scratches running through these painted spots. And yeah, it's basically just a matter of expanding, starting simple with just a metal, adding a first label, and adding, start expanding from there. One thing I would like to note about, especially in regards with to more than one material, is you should always apply additional materials as labels on top of the first original material. So if I want to have more dirt on this model, what I would do is create a new material. Let's pick a plastic, and let's make this black. So maybe I want some oil on this. I'll copy the spot texture, paste it, So I just Control copy, Control V, and I'll apply this as an opacity. Double click the spots. Just going to quickly change the variation by adding a different number to the seed. Then I'll drag this plastic onto the metal as a label. And now you can see I have some black spots scattered across my metal. So always add materials as labels on top of the original metal, original material. Here's another example where instead of using a metal as a base material, I'm using a emissive material. And you can see you can create some really interesting effects in combination with using the occlusion to catch sort of the edges. So you can make something that glows from the inside. Then I want to touch on another interesting application for the material graph, and that's labels for packaging. So what you see many times, especially for beer and wine bottles, is that these bottles have labels with various sort of textures and finishes on different parts of the label. So you would have a normal print, and then you would have sort of a gold print on several portions, even on the glass. You see that in many cases of beer bottles, where you have sort of a gold overprint. In this scene that I've already prepared, let me open up the material graph and let me get rid of a few setups that I made. So I have here a texture, and this is a UV mapped texture. And what I want to do is to use give the different colors in the texture a different material. And I want to use just this one texture. The way I can do that is by using the color key mask utility node. Double click. I can select the key color, and I will pick with the color picker here. With the preview active, I will pick this yellow color. Click OK. And now if I preview I have to attach it to the color key mask. If I now preview the color key mask, I can play with these values. So what this allows me to do is mask out within a certain range a color from a texture. And because this works as a mask, I can add a material, a metal, for instance. preview the metal by hitting C, change the roughness and the color. I will add this metal as a label on top of the glass, and I will use the output of the color key mask as an opacity for my metal. And now I have masked out that portion of the image that I wanted to be in this gold material. I can create a additional color key mask for another metal. What I can do is multi-select with control different nodes, and I'll add them here. And this time I want to mask out these blue portions. So I'm double clicking the second color key mask, and for the color key I'm selecting this blue. I'm connecting it to the texture, and now if I preview the color key mask, I can see I have masked out these blue portions. And I will add this metal as another label on my glass. And if I now tweak the color of my metal, you can see now that I have another material. And I could repeat this for this gray color as well. And what you end up with is, the ability to quickly make variations of colors, and this is just using a single texture. So another thing I want to cover is material animations. So I have this example of a dragon, and I did similar things with applying different labels for scratches and sort of dirt on top, sort of oil patches. And we can animate materials now in KeyShot 6. Let me organize this window. Like this. So I have a plastic here, and the color is defined by a noise texture. Let me get rid of this texture so that the color is defined by the paint properties, paint property itself. If I want to animate the color in this example. So the way to add animations to a material is by you have several options. You can add an animation through the button in the ribbon for the material graph, which is this one. Add animation node to work area. By default, this will create a color fade animation. The color fade is sort of a gradient. By default, it's red to blue. And you can apply this to, for instance, in this case, the color of the paint. Another way to add an animation is to double-click the material you want to animate, or the texture you want to animate, and then go to the parameter you want to animate specifically. In this case, the color. If you right-click on the color texture thumbnail here, then you can specify an animation. In this case, I can select color fade, and that will actually add a color fade and already connect it to the color. As I add a animation, if I open up the timeline, you can see that I get a folder containing the name of the color fade I just added. This folder is the name of my material. So if I change this name to, for instance, dragon, then at least it should update. Or perhaps it updates if, yeah. You can see my material name is dragon. I now get a folder dragon, and this contains all the animations that are associated with this material. If I now scrub the timeline, because you can see that my color animates from yellow to blue. That's one application for color fade. I just want to highlight the other animation type. We also have the number fade animation, and I'm right-clicking in the material graph and picking animation number fade, and perhaps I want to animate the color as well as the roughness of my paint. Now it's defined as 0.05, but I want to animate it from 0 to 0.1. So if I double click the number fade, you get a from and a to value, and the from is at the beginning of the animation. So if I put 0 and I want it to apply to a roughness, then this is 0 roughness, and 2 is the end of the animation, and 0.1 is 0.1 roughness then. So I drag it on top, I drag the number fade on top of the roughness, and now I get an additional animation here in the timeline. And now you can see that at the beginning of the animation, my roughness is 0. Let me just disable the bump map for clarity. So I get perfectly shiny surfaces. And as I progress through the animation, at the end, I have a rough surface for my base plastic. This is one way that you can use animations. Let me just, if time allows, show a few a few more options with animations. I'm gonna get rid of these spots. Yeah, and let me get rid of the bump map as well. So let's say I have this color and perhaps I want to load another texture. And let me pick sort of a wood. We load this wood, hitting C to preview, and sort of tweak. Yeah, it should do. And I'm adding a color composite node, adding the noise that serves as a basis for my paint color to the source, and adding the new texture as a background, and then assigning the color composite to the color input of my paint. Quickly reorganize with this button. Now, there's not much going on yet, but that's because my color composite is set to normal, and it is showing my noise texture. But what I want is to have an animation where over time my color changes from the noise to the texture map. So the way I do that is by adding a animation, and I'm picking a number fade, and I want to fade the source alpha of the color composite. So I'm fading this one from 0 or from 1 to 0. And if I now add this to the source alpha, you can see that as I scrub through time, that I'm actually fading between both textures. So yeah, there's lots more applications for the material animations, but I think this covers sort of the most basic setups. And I just recall that I might want to point out one other feature that might not be immediately obvious, so I'm just gonna touch on it really quickly. And I'm doing it with this metal, making it perfectly shiny. So I'm going to add a texture map, and I'm loading sort of an interesting metal. Yeah. Hitting C to preview, changing the size, scale, and I want to use this one to map my roughness. So I have assigned the texture map to the roughness channel of my metal, and now I'm getting my texture map is serving as an input to define the roughness. But perhaps I want more control over the exact range of my roughness, and the way to do that is to add a utility node, the color to number. The color to number sort of behaves as a texture in that it can be used for any parameter that can be textured. So any parameter where you see this texture thumbnail you can assign the color to number node to. What the color to number node does is take a color input, a texture input, which can be a bitmap or a procedural texture, and it will convert it to a specific number range. So perhaps I want to use this texture, but only in a way that the roughness varies between in a certain range. So I'll add the texture map to the color to number, and by default the input ranges from 0 to 1, which means for color input that it ranges from completely black to completely white. And I'll attach the output of the color to number to the roughness. And by default the output is the same as the input, which means 0 to 1. But in this case, I want my minimum roughness to be 0.01 and my maximum roughness to be 0.1. And I can define that range exactly in the color to number node. So as I define the output from 0.01 to 0.1, now my roughness for the metal varies within this exact range. Also, my roughness, I might want to have my roughness between 0.1 and 0.2, and you can do this as well. So in this case, it's much more subtle, but the color to number parameter is a nice way of sort of remapping the color values of a texture into a more precise range of values to be used for a texturable channel. I think this concludes this webinar about the material graph. I tried to give an intro as well as go a little deeper into some of the more specific and more specialized functionalities. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, we have one. You went over color to number, but there was also someone who was asking about curve color random and also surface backside mask.
Yeah. Yeah, surface backside mask, that's kind of an experimental feature. I'm not even sure I've access to it right now because I might. It's only available as an experimental feature. But the color curve, I can certainly go into. Let me find a scene. Quickly loading a scene where I have several curves. Yeah, gonna quit this one. So here I have curve geometry. Material, yeah. Also, if you have the material list here, you can right click or even in your real-time view and click edit material graph. This will open up the material. This will open up straight the material graph. So I have here for my curve geometry a metal, and the color is driven by the color gradient, which is defined from green to yellow. And one thing to note for curves is that the gradient type can be set to curve, which means that it applies the gradient across the length of the curve. This example shows it nicely. So you have short curves as well as long curves, and you can see that the same gradient applies across the entire length of the curve. So if I change this one into a more distinct color, you see it more clearly. The shorter curves have the same gradient as the longer curves. So to answer the question, the functionality about the curve color randomize is that it applies to curves only, curve geometry only. The curve color randomize needs an input to randomize. So in this case, I'm going to connect the color gradient to the map, the input of the curve color randomize, and I will connect the output to the color of the metal. The curve color randomize, as its name suggests, randomizes the input color. So as I increase the U number, you can see that there are now random variations in U of the original color texture. So if I have this U at 0, then all the strands, all the curves would have the same U. But if I increase this U value, you can see that some curves have a different, starting to have a different U than the specified gradient. If I take this all the way up to 1, you can see that the randomization is even more extreme. The same goes for the saturation. If I put this to 0, then all curves will have the same saturation. If I increase this to 1, then you can see some clearly see randomization. So some curves will have a higher saturation than others, and then the same applies as well to the value. If I put this to 1, then all curves are equally bright. If I increase this, then some curves will be darker than others. Important to note is that while the slider only goes to 2 for the value, these can be increased even more by doing manual inputs. And also, as you see, you have these texture thumbnails. You can actually texture the value variation as well. Hope that answers the question about the curve color randomize.
Yeah, that was great. Let's take one more question, and then this will be the last one, since we're already at 11:12. The question is, what is a good time to use texture versus using a label?
Not sure I completely understand the question.
Yeah, well, I think because in your demo you're using labels in conjunction with textures. Basically, like, if you want to layer on different effects like you were doing the scratches, I would probably think labels would be the most versatile option in the material graph.
Yeah, I think the main, yeah, also I have this Dragon open now where I have a metal with two materials attached as a label, which you can see here in the label overview as well. And I would say you would use a label if you want to have your surface to have a different material in those areas. So in this case, let me just unlink this black plastic. Instead of having this as a label on the metal, I could have also used these spots and made a color composite and combined these into one, and having this as a color. Yeah, I have to invert it. So I could have done this instead of having two labels, but now my because it's now applied to this paint material. Now both my paint as my black specks have the same roughness as well. But that's actually not what I wanted. So what I wanted is to have this orangey yellow sort of slightly rough paint, or perhaps even rougher. So I want to have this rough paint, and then I want these black spots to be perfectly shiny. And the only way to achieve that effect is to work with two different labels. So I would say use labels when you want different areas on your surface to have different material properties.
All right, that sounds pretty good. Is there anything else you want to say, Dries? Or are we good?
Yeah, I think this was sort of a basic intro into the material graph, but I can expect we'll have more advanced or more focused webinars in the future. For instance, focusing specifically on the possibilities of material animations. But yeah, I hope this was helpful to a lot of users to sort of at least get familiar with the features. And if I want to give one message, it's just to play around and not be afraid of using it. I mean, if you have a large advanced looking material graph like this one, it can look a little daunting at first, but I think the message is to just start simple. Start simple with a few nodes and just start expanding from there, and learn as you go, because the real power of this system is that any adjustment that you make in the nodes is reflected in real time. So it should be a very fast learning curve for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Dries. And thank you everyone for joining us. As always, this webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KeyShot3D. As well, it'll be found on our website at KeyShot.com/learning. So yeah, we'll see you next week. Thanks everyone.